Okay, so welcome to the Leadermorphosis podcast, Swarnalakshmi. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for inviting me to this podcast. And just so that you know, this is my first podcast, and I'm very happy and excited to meet you here. Thank you very much for the opportunity as well.
Yeah, well, it's a privilege to be your first podcast. I'm happy to to have the honor.
Oh, that's very kind of you to say.
So maybe you could start by telling us what is a child. I'll say that question again. So maybe you could start by telling us what is a children's parliament and how did you get involved in them?
Sure. Children's Parliament. These parliaments begin at neighbourhood levels, and they are called neighbourhood children's parliaments. And later, we also made sure to include the word inclusive neighbourhood children's parliaments. And we begin from neighborhood, and 30 families in a neighborhood come together, like children from 30 families in a neighborhood come together on a common platform. And we as children were discussing, when I was a kid, we were discussing, and even now children are discussing the issues that they see around them, the issues that affect them most, and they find solutions for those issues and resolve them. And I got involved in these children's parliaments when I was 11 years of age, completed grade 6 in 2000, the end of 2009 and beginning of 2010, when I got the opportunity in my school that these children's parliaments established the neighborhood school level children's parliament. And that's how I got involved. And when I was a kid, I got elected as a communications minister, and then that's my involvement in it.
Wow. Can you say something briefly about how the election process works? So how did you get elected in your first role?
Oh, that's a very interesting question, and I'm so looking forward to answering that. The election process in these children's parliament work very interestingly, and as well as pretty different from the election process that we would have all heard in different parliamentary system, like the majority based election. So this is like something that has a consent based decision making system
Mm-hmm.
in parliaments, like what what we have. We usually have elections in a sociocratic way. Sociocracy is like derived from two words, socias and kratos. Socias, which means companions, and kratos means rule. So this is a rule by companions. Of course, in the government processes, the forms of government, Aristotle said that there are different forms of government. He identified like monarchy, like ruled by one, and then aristocracy, ruled by few. And he referred democracy by saying polity. And he said ruled by many. And that's like the present day democracy that he referred to. And now we say that ruled by companions together, and that's how sociocracy works. And so in sociocracy we make decisions, like we elect people based on consent. And there's a nuance, of course, between consent and consensus. Consent is acceptance, whereas consensus is agreement. So we try out, we shrink our decisions as much as possible, and we see whether they are working out well, and then we expand it more and more if it works well with our experience. And that's how we make decisions, and that's how we also elect people. And that's how I got elected as a communication minister. Of course, this is pretty long, although you asked it for a brief answer.
No, it's really useful. And on the podcast, I've talked to lots of different guests about some of the principles of like consent-based decision making, for example. And I think it's you define it so clearly and so simply, but I think it's really hard for a lot of people to get because we're not used to that way of making decisions. We're used to usually consensus or majority vote or autocratic decisions. So it's I'm smiling because it's just so fun that young people are learning these principles at such a young age in the children's parliaments.
Mhm. Of course, it's a wonderful opportunity for us to learn such principles. And as I started growing older, and as I started getting into different firms, such as, um, for example, in my civil services training, I'm being told that I have the skills that people usually have difficulty in obtaining or in acquiring, is what like my coach usually says to me. So I'm so happy to hear that from you as an emphasis.
Yeah. And as I understand it, you sort of as you grew up, you got involved in different parts of the children's parliaments, and it eventually becoming the national prime minister. Is that right?
Yeah, you're very right. As I like when time grew, uh, I also involved. I had a chance to involve in. Sorry, I'm going to say this again.
Sure.
Yes, of course. I you're very right. I've been getting involved in different levels of federation of these parliaments. So they basically get federated at various levels, starting from the neighborhood to the village, and then it goes further up to um, blocks and counties, and then states, and from states to nations, and from nations to right now it's in the international level. And so I uh, am privileged to get the opportunity of being in the state level, as it's initially the finance minister, and then later the prime minister of the state level parliament. And then I also had an opportunity through my parliament members that because they elected me up in the national level, I also became the national child prime minister twice.
Wow, that's so impressive. I want to come back to some of the things that you've learned and some of the principles. But before I do that, I wanted to talk about what you're working on currently, because I know that you're, as well as studying for your civil services degree, you're also a convener for the Provisional Global Children's Parliament. Is that right?
Yes, you're right. And I'm one of the adult allies there. And I also support the children to get together and help them understand the concept. Um, and I'm currently involved in the international and setting up the provisional, like right now it's provisional World Children's Parliament. That's how we call it because we have children only from 7 countries, and we hope to get more and more as in when we get more participants from different countries around the world.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you could share some lessons so far from working, because I imagine working with children from 7 different countries already must be quite a different context from working in a more kind of local parliament. So what are some of the things you've learned in sort of supporting them to convene?
Supporting them to convene, of course, that's such a wonderful question. Actually, I mean, when I talk about what I'm currently learning, it just interests me most. So thanks for asking that question. And yes, it seems like it involves a lot of learning processes as and when we move into experimenting these parliaments in the global level. For example, culture, like we meet as like when they meet as children together, then we got to make sure that culture is not a barrier, and each culture may have its own value. For example, one country may perceive like saying starting an email with dear is something that they would prefer, and some countries would say hi is something that they would prefer. And when you say, like, some countries would prefer start your email with respected. So those are very different cultures, and even writing a letter involves that kind of cultural, a lot of cultural things. So accepting them all and knowing them and accepting them as it is, or accepting people as they are, is that seemed to be a little bit challenging initially. And now, as and when we go on, when we understand each other more and more, we are understanding how they work. I think that's pretty interesting. But still, we find that meeting virtually is a challenge because, like, when I was in my state level parliament, I had the opportunity of getting together with my peers, and with that too without any barriers.
Mm.
I can easily talk with my friends, have fun, have chat whenever we want. We tend to relax, and sometimes, um, for example, when we are doing podcasts, or when we are doing, well, actually, we haven't done any podcasts, but in case if we're doing interviews,
Mm.
then we tend to suggest each other uh, our feedbacks. We don't really hesitate. But these days, like in the virtual environment, we're not very much aware that who perceives how, and how do we bring the feedback across to the people, like especially to the children, without uh, without them thinking that this is in another school. And so that's a little bit challenging. But other than that, we're finding it quite interesting, and that, like, we also have the limited time these days because the school schedules work online. The children are having a lot of homeworks and other school stuffs to do as well. So it's quite challenging to find time to coordinate with them. Other than that, I think the culture seems to be quite interesting.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I'm curious to know what you find are really valuable skills for people to learn in order to um, get the most out of children's parliaments. So I'd love to hear a bit about what training and what guidance you've received over the years, and now as you're sort of teaching and supporting, with this provisional global children's parliament, what you're realizing are the kind of crucial skills and how you support people to develop those. So what would your thoughts be on that, on the skills side of things?
Skill set, I think that depends upon which environment we're actually choosing to teach. For example, if it's a virtual environment, especially because you're asking me, considering the context of provisional world children's parliament, I'd really say that it would be more useful to possess listening, because sometimes the platforms that we use may cause some delays.
Mm.
And so the delays will let us, or will really test our patience sometimes. And so we may want to be a little bit patient first. So being patient is one skill, and secondly, listening to each other more carefully is yet another skill in this virtual environment. Of course, even if it's not a virtual environment, it's even useful to listen to one another in direct environment as well. However, I feel that in virtual environment it's even more important and significant. We possess the listening skill, and we listen to one another with patience.
Mm.
And secondly, I feel that we do require the skill of, possessing, like, preparation is yet another important skill. And for example, when we are going to go into a meeting, then it's important that we make sure what we're going to talk, provided that we have less time, limited time, without wasting anyone's time. Then so we may want to make sure that want we convey what we wanted to, what we inclined to convey. So preparation is something that seems to be important to me. For example, preparing the agenda in advance and preparing the meeting, like the points that what I'm going to speak. Of course, certain things come spontaneously and they emerge as and when we talk, but few things could be organized in advance. And I'm glad that we were taught initially when we were doing the Children's Parliament. When we were in the Children's Parliament, we were taught these skills. Although it was not virtual environment, we were taught these skills because that those days we were able to meet only once in 3 months as a state level parliamentarian.
Yeah, I think having, like, I've seen this documentary, Power to the Children, which I really recommend to listeners as well. And for me, watching that documentary and seeing the circles of children having discussions and making decisions and taking action together, I think also this kind of circle practice is something new, not just for children who are learning this, but also I think about adults in new ways of working spaces as well. That we're not used to really listening to each other, slowing down, sharing in rounds, and we're so kind of wired to jump to solutions, to talk over each other, so it's such a valuable skill to train people in. So again, it's just, to me, it's such a gift that children are getting taught these skills at younger ages.
I'm so happy that you brought this up, like rounds and sharing each other's. You exactly used that word, but I'm not really getting it. May I hear you say what you were saying before?
Yeah, and now I'm trying to remember what I said. I talked about sharing in rounds and being patient and slowing down instead of jumping to
Slowing
solutions.
down. Slowing down instead of jumping to solutions. I think those things that I really loved because slowing down is something that requires in an inclusive environment as well. For example, as a visually impaired, it was particularly for me a different experience because in an inclusive environment, when you take notes in paper and pen, I got to take notes in Braille. And so Braille requires a little bit more time compared to the notes that you take in paper and pen. And so therefore, these days I'm accessing technology and I'm more exposed to it. But before I was not. And therefore I had to use the Braille. And so the world had to slow down for me. And my parliamentarians did it for me, and that helped me to come breaking the barriers, to come up to this level by breaking the barriers, I would say, because in an inclusive environment, one of my experiences is like talking in the United Nations. I had the opportunity to represent India in the United Nations, and when we were about to talk in the release of the SDGs. It was a time when the UN released its Sustainable Development Goals. And so when I had to be there in the SDG release, along with some of my peers from India, our talk was designed in a way that we prepared our talk and with the help of some adult experts in a way like one person talks in their own language, like a girl shares her story in the tribal language, and then I try to get that write them in Braille, and then translate them in English for everyone
Mm.
simultaneously. And there was a person with hearing impairment who did that again simultaneously in sign language. So we three were able to speak together just in one platform and in one voice. We did not pause for each other, but of course we did listen to each other, and we were keep on going, and we finished at the same time. And so when we were able to do this, the reason that we were able to do this is because that we slowed down for each other, and it was also, and again, a different experience for me, um, to stay with someone having hearing impairment. And so I had a very different experience by staying with them, and I learned a lot. And I wish my peers also have the same opportunity like me. But unfortunately, this COVID environment doesn't really um, provide the way, hopefully, when the COVID diminishes, we could all get together and share our experiences as I had it before. So
Yeah. Wow.
slowing down.
That's so powerful. I myself had an experience of giving a presentation for a mental health charity, and I got some coaching on how to make my presentation accessible for different learning needs. And it was such, I learned so much about the language that I use and how I present it, and slowing down, creating space. I think there's so much to learn from really considering others' needs. And I think that's obviously something that you've really championed, with your visual impairment, and that symbolic speaking in one voice in multiple languages, so to speak, is it's really inspiring.
Inspiring to listen from you as well. Like you learned the accessibility features. I wish that people across the world learn this. Like they all learn how to slow down for each other. And the
Mm.
statement that we made in the UN just reminds me. I could remember the statement that we all made. Like the three of us could speak in one voice is because that we slowed down for each other. If we are able to share and care beyond differences, if we are able to slow down for each other, and if we are able to speak in one voice, and so can the rest of the world, is what we said in the UN. And so that's just
Mm.
like something that I'm getting from my memory. I'm so happy to hear you say that you learned, and I wish um, when this podcast reaches our audience, and when it reaches beyond that, then I hope whomever listens to this podcast also gets a chance to explore more into accessibility.
Yes, me too. I wonder what what you think would need to be in place for us to have more parliaments like this in the world, because I get really excited and I start to think, like, why don't we just have these everywhere? Like, why aren't we teaching people in schools, all of this? And I imagine there are some challenges to making that happen. So yeah, what are your thoughts about how we could help, spread this movement and support people to set up more parliaments, and more, and also just these some of these principles, to spread these principles in schools, in workplaces? What do you think is important to make that happen?
First, I would suggest that for more details, like to have such parliaments, and I suggest to contact our World Parliament, and I can my team and I can respond. And I also recommend that you can read a book called Hello Neighbourocracy, written by Father Edwin John, who founded these parliaments in India. So initially, these children's parliaments were founded in India, and then it spread across the world. So he is um, the founder of the the neighborhood-based children's parliaments. And so He had written a book called Hello Neighborocracy, and I suggested that's available in Leanpub. So maybe I would suggest our audience mm, read that book. Sorry, let me repeat this. Sorry, let me repeat this.
No problem.
First, I would suggest that our audience and the listeners of this podcast, if they wanted these kind of parliaments to be established, they may want to contact pwcparliament@gmail.com, which is the email address of the Provisional World Children's Parliament. And so my team and I can take responsibility to revert back.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, I would also suggest that whomever wants to establish such parliaments, they may want to read the book written by Father Edwin John, the founder of these kind of neighborhood children's parliaments. Initially, they were founded by him in India, and now it's spreading across the world. And so we may want to read the book written by him, which is available in Leanpub. I can actually repeat the name of the book, which is Hello Neighborocracy, available in Leanpub. So
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to put those links in the episode show notes as well, because I just finished reading that book, Hello Neighborocracy.
oh, great.
And it's so brilliant. It's like really a kind of practical guide to the principles that we've been talking about, and some just amazing stories and examples also of what's possible, like some of the issues that can be addressed and some of the changes we can make in society when we come together.
Exactly.
I want to talk about when you and I spoke in the conversations leading up to this recording. You said this great thing about mindset, to kind of have that it's important to have a collaboration mindset, and for children and adults to really collaborate, there needs to be a bit of a mindset shift. Could you say something about that?
Oh, definitely. I think I was about to mention that as well when we were talking about the skill set. So that's one of the skills that's required, like the mindset of collaboration. So when adults think, they may think that, oh, how do I establish these kind of children's parliaments? And they would also think that, well, children may think in their own ways, so they require only the support of the adults, or it is the adults who are very powerful. And there may be some preconceived notions, and we could see some shift in the world, but it would be lovely there if we're able to see more and more kind of thoughts that overpower the preconceived notion of adults being more powerful than children. So it's neither the children nor the adults are powerful over each other. It's that the children see things that the adults cannot see, and the adults can see things that the children may not be able to see. And so we may want to collaborate, join hands together, and travel in this world. And so it's not about the adults and not about the children. It's about traveling together, and the mindset of collaboration is something that's really important and significant, is what I feel. And that that collaborative mindset, when we really reach that collaboration, I think we could, anything is possible. For example, if you think that, Greta Thunberg is there, Malala Yousafzai, of course, they're all great personalities. Certainly, imagine that what if they have emerged from an organization, and if they are still with the support of the organization. Of course, we learned that Malala was the district prime minister in one of the children's parliaments in Pakistan, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine that how the world would be if Greta's and Malala's power is mostly with the organization, is supported by a whole organization, and then that would be even more powerful. The organizations together can make great changes. Like, and we could see, I think, even in the recent Earth Summit happened in Glasgow, we could hear that children raised their voice. They supported. They in fact recommended the government to make changes. They recommended the countries, and so imagine that had it been with the support of an organization, with the support of a global level organization, and that too that's recognized by officially by the United Nations, and how the UN is like, so is the UN recognized, like as is the UN recognized, imagine so is the parliaments are recognized, so are the parliaments recognized, then that's a different scenario. Then that would be even more powerful to recommend the government. And so the UN government and the children's government could together collaborate and function. And the needs of the children could be communicated through children's parliaments to the adults with the double link process that we have in sociocracy. And the adults with their double link can come and suggest what their concerns are. For example, the children may say, well, we're sitting in the social media and we would like to be recognized. We would love to be recognized in the Facebook, and to, like, for example, to use social media platforms, although we're below 18, because we have the need to access them. And then the adults can raise concerns like, well, what if you are sitting more in the social media, then that's going to affect your time and strength. And so the children can then come back and say, of course, that's you're right. We could see what we were not seeing before through you. So now then we would like to, what if we decide on something like we restrict our time, or the Facebook has, if you have any such concerns, you, while making Facebook, if the world could, make some restrictions in the Facebook for children, like time limitation, or if you're like more than 3 hours in front of your system, then the system alerts you and suggests you to go and look at any greenery, and then the adults accept it, and when they implement it, then they could see great changes, right? That's the power of decision making, like collaborative decision making, and that too with a collaborative mindset.
Yeah, it's so true. It's it makes so much sense to me as someone who, when I first joined the world of work, I was very frustrated with the fact that I didn't get involved in decisions that affected me as a low-level employee, and that really annoyed me. It's like, but that affects me. I should have a say in that, shouldn't I? I know things that you
Wow.
don't know.
Hmm.
And I think there is really a parent-child dynamic in a lot of workplaces. And I think, in the children's parliaments, that dynamic is very literal. It's like adults relating to children, but I think we can infantilize children and assume that they don't know anything, or they need to be protected. We can't talk about heavy things, or they can't be responsible. But I think, speaking to you and watching the documentary and reading Hello Neighbourocracy, it's so clear that we underestimate children, and that we lose a lot by not involving them and getting their input on challenges that really affect them.
Exactly, you brought the right point. I mean, when you said low, as a low level employee, I could just remember something that we always emphasize on, the voices that needs to be heard from the grassroots to the global level. And so I just remember the voices of grassroots when you said the low level employees.
Mm.
So I'm so fond of grassroots voices getting to the global level. And when you say that, I'm just feeling really a sense of collaboration. So that kind of getting the voices and having the voices, the unheard voices, to be heard in the global level is something that we're focusing on in our provisional World Children's Parliament, which we soon expect to become as a World Children's Parliament.
Hmm. I'm interested to know what have you learned personally over these, it's been like more than a decade, right? Working with these children's parliaments. What have you learned about yourself? What have been some of the challenges? What have been the biggest lessons?
Lessons learned. Um, as I said, talking about learning something and the things that I learned something, I think that interests me most. And so this is again a question of that sort. And so happy to answer that. And I really learned many lessons, like how to be very passionate, because being passionate is something which is indispensable, that I think
Hmm.
in these kind of parliaments and setting up these parliaments, because unless and until we're passionate, it is hard. I mean, our passion could be on different things. We will be passionate, but on what and how we're passionate, I think matters a lot. So, um, for example, if we're passionate in wealth and enter into these kind of children's parliaments, then that's a different question. But if we're passionate on the world and on the change that we want to see in the world and on the change that we believe we could make in the world, then that's a different question and that's a different passion altogether. And that's something we may want to possess while we enter into these parliaments. And so when I entered into these parliament, I entered without any expectations. I just entered with a passion that I only entered with commitment, because someone said to me that, hey, if you want to enter into these parliaments, you got to be very committed. And I said, well, of course I can be committed. And I think I'm still trying to fulfill my word that I gave him a decade ago. And that sort of commitment. And secondly, passion is something that's really important. As I said, passion, being passionate on what, again. So I was passionate when I was joining this children's parliament on making change in the world. That's all I knew. And when I just remember the first time when the news, the press people asked me that, what would you like to do as a finance minister? The first interview was like, well, I will help the people. And then I couldn't say anything more. And that's passion. That's something that how we're going to help is not, that's not, of course, that we will learn from our peers and from acquiring more skills and from discussion and everything, but being more, you know, passionate on our end goal is important. Helping someone, helping the world. And I also learned that the passion is something that I learned from my mother. For example, when we were making our first trip as a finance minister to an area which got hit by cyclone, to distribute stationaries to the children who got really affected in the cyclone. We were choosing to go by car, and our car met with an accident, and it was a sudden accident, and nobody expected that. And the driver was having some difficulties because he was bleeding, his nose was bleeding. And I became a little unconscious, I would say. And the nun sister was sitting in front. The car had some glass pieces entering into her forehead.
Oof.
But despite of that, my mother just said something. Everyone go to the hospital, come back. These are the challenges that we're facing, which are far lesser than the challenges that are currently confronted by many children who are waiting for us there across in another state, so another district of the state. So we may want to go fulfill what we promised and then come back despite of whatever challenges we encounter. And she was the one to take us and to really relax all of us. And despite of the headache that I had, I said, "Mummy, I'm really going to stay at home." She said, why did you come here? What for you've come here? And I said, well, to distribute the stationaries. Then if you have not fulfilled, then it means that you haven't fulfilled your commitment. And so that made me to adhere what she said, and I finally accepted, went with her and with some of the adult coordinators in our parliament. I was able to distribute the required stationery materials to the children who were there, and it was so happy despite of that challenge to meet the children. And at the end, as my mother said, the satisfaction that I derived out of the the challenges that I encountered, I had two things. One, on my plate, I had challenges that I encountered filled. Another, on my plate, I had satisfaction. When I balanced it to, the satisfaction weighed heavily than the challenges, because the satisfaction was more than the challenges that I faced. And that's passion.
That's inspiring. I think it's another thing that I think is inspiring about young people is that they aren't as cynical as adults. I think when I think about a scene in the documentary where one of the children's parliaments were discussing alcoholism in their village and how to tackle it, I think a lot of adults would be like, oh, that's a heavy issue. I mean, we're not going to solve that. But I was really inspired by the empowerment of the children who were like, okay, so this is how it's affecting us. This is very real. What are we going to do about it? And it was like not even a question of, I think a lot of people are resigned in the world to, oh, that's the way it is, and we're kind of powerless. And to me, the neighborhoodization and these children's parliaments remind us that we all have power,
I
and that
do.
together we can really have a voice. We can make something happen.
Yeah, I mean that when we have a proper platform like children's parliaments, I think we could. I think when I did my dissertation in England, I finished my master's in international relations and global governance at Aston University in England. So when I did my master's, I I did my dissertation on voices of children, enfranchising voices of children to the global level, where I discussed power as a main challenge, and as well as how these parliaments help us to overcome the challenge of power structure by creating a governance process for us. And that power help adults see things differently than they were seeing it before. And that also help children uh, build their self-confidence. And for example, you said alcoholism. The
Mm,
reason that our children's parliaments are able to tackle these issues because they they encountered it. We encounter it in our daily life. When we see that the issues affect us, then
mm,
we definitely want to make some change. Um, Somebody said to me this morning, they said, when unless and until the issue affects me, I couldn't see like a way to talk about that. And so the alcoholism affected the children, and so they were able to handle it. And despite whether it's heavy or whether it's not, I also had a chance today to read about a story. It was not a story, a real incident that, mica producing areas, and so how the mines in mica producing areas work. They usually in mines send children as child laborers, and so one of the children who was as a child laborer became a civil servant in the Indian Administrative Service. So when she was saying, she expressed how her childhood had been, how she was powerless, and what, like,
mm,
unless and until, like, maybe for us, for the children in the urban areas, it might be heavy subject to discuss about, oh, mica producing area, oh, mines. I think they're heavy topics, but for victims who experience these,
mm,
it would be a real immediate and important topic to address. And so what this parliament does is that it brings both the children who doesn't see these things and who also experience these things to come together on a common platform so that they get together and discuss these issues that they see around them. So the children who are in urban areas may have different issues, such as they may not have um, life skills, and they may not have some important issues, such as, like, for example, I knew a person from the village was able to tackle the mechanics of the car, while the child in the urban area was just theoretically aware of the mechanics of the car. So that's the difference. So, but this parliament provides a platform for two of them to come together. When that happens, both of them get to share their experience to each other, and thus they get to know more and more about each other's environment, and thus they collaborate and finally make a governance. That
It makes,
understanding and bonding. Oh, sorry, you were?
yeah, no, I was just going to say it to me it makes so much sense, and it becomes more and more ridiculous that we don't have that in country parliaments and governments, that that politicians so rarely take the time to really listen to and share experiences with people who are affected by the things they're making policies about. And this, these neighborhood and children's parliaments give a very scalable structure, because they're sort of nested circles, with the double lead links, as you said, like that you can really do that. You can tap into people's real experiences and voices and integrate them into solutions.
Yes, of course. I mean, that kind of, like, integrating, and when we decide on something, when we integrate and make solutions, and then I think we can imagine a better world created for all of us.
Hmm. I guess I'm thinking of listeners now as well who are exploring new ways of working in lots of different contexts, many of them in organizations and businesses. I'm wondering, what advice would you share with people who are inspired by some of the principles that we've talked about today? What words of wisdom would you give them in their journeys?
Well, I would suggest the listeners to um, have these parliaments established in their areas and where they live, and to also introduce their children these kind of setups so that they could come up to the global level. So they could
Mm.
contact us, and then, um, sorry, Lisa, can you repeat the question? I'm going to do it again.
Yeah, sure. I'm wondering what advice you would give to listeners who are interested in some of the principles we've talked about. They're maybe inspired to try some of these things to make a change in their organization or their community. What advice would you give them?
I would recommend them to initiate these kind of children's parliaments and parliaments among the adults as well, these kind of neighborhood parliaments, basically, so that they can also join hands with us, of course, if they wish to. Then they definitely can contact us. As I said, um, the email address is pwcparliament@gmail.com, is something that I'd like to repeat, although I said it before, so they can contact us. And so we'd be happy to support them in establishing these kind of parliaments. And secondly, I would suggest that they, like, we shrink our decisions down as much as possible, and then try it out. Without trying out, I think we may not be able to accomplish. So trying out is really important. So we may want to try out and see what comes, and what we learn from it. Maybe one person's experience may not be the other person's, or one organization's experience may not be the other's. And so trying it out in a smaller level and then expanding it as and when we notice the challenges, we change it. We have the mindset to keep changing it from what we originally proposed is something that the person or people together who establish these organizations may want to possess, something that I think. And also, I would suggest that um, they encourage children and that they don't underestimate them, because children are powerful. And actually, in one of the books written by Mr. John Buck, We the People Consenting to a Deeper Democracy, which is a classic book for sociocracy, which we're following, um, I think he had mentioned about rainbow community schools. And I think the rainbow community schools are following, I'm not sure it is. Lisa, I'm really going to repeat this part.
Yeah, no worries.
In one of the papers or books written by Mr. John Buck, who is one of the adult allies and of the Provisional World Children's Parliament, and also um, the global sociocratic trainer who had written the classic book for sociocracy. He said in his paper, he had mentioned in his paper about Rainbow Community School, and this school was tested among 25,000 other schools, and the fourth graders and eighth graders of the school were taken as samples. And so these fourth graders and eighth graders possessed the skill that was better than the adults' thinking, and in fact, they scored really high than the 25,000 other school children in their brain and mind thinking. It was the organization called Lectica, which has a measurement scale between 1 to 14 to measure the mind, brain, and educational, like thinking of the children. Educational thinking in general. I think the 14 is a scale of the highest scale set of Einstein's thinking. And so it seems like the paper, like the children had scored pretty much high than the 25,000 other schools. I think they were the one to measure their the samples of these children. The organization that I mentioned had the survey taken with these children. So when that's proven, I think, let me repeat this part again. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's such a good soundbite because it's such a brilliant statistic. So
But I said it in a crazy way, so
that's okay.
Mr. John Buck, who is the current adult ally and the supporter of the Provisional World Children's Parliament, and is also the sociocratic trainer globally, had written a paper in which he mentioned about Rainbow Community School, and this is a school that follows sociocracy. When this school was tested along with all other 25,000 other schools by an organization called Lectica, which measures the brain and mind thinking, and also had the scale measurement between 1 to 14, where 14 is the thinking of Einstein. They said that the Rainbow Community School students, like the fourth graders and eighth graders of the school, scored really high than the 25,000 other school children whom they have tested. And their thinking had been measured, and it's been said that it is even as better as the thinking of the adults.
Wow.
Because the answers that they gave seem to be really impressive. And they don't seem to be judgmental I remember using it for my dissertation purpose.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And to me, it's, I don't know if you're familiar with Robert Keegan's work about the stages of adult development, but he says that one of the kind of higher stages of adult development happens usually when people are around 40. But I can imagine that if children were exposed to some of these practices and really learnt these skills like listening and slowing down and including and making consent based decisions and so on, I can really see how that improves their thinking, that develops them as leaders. And I think that would accelerate so much of what would be possible in the world in terms of addressing some of these big issues that we're addressing right now. So it's great to hear that statistic, because to me it makes sense. And again, I get excited because I think, yes, let's teach all children this in schools, please.
Oh, I wish too. I wish the same too. I mean, you know, another interesting example that I remember of inclusion and slowing down is something that when I got involved in these parliaments, we had the opportunity of listening to the indigenous people who lived here, who said that the children weren't able to receive the required certificates that could work for their educational purpose, that from the offices. And so the adults were saying to us, especially the social workers were saying to us, that they weren't able to really get the required certificates for the children, and they were struggling for 10 long years. And so my colleague and I, when we were kids, we decided, I think it was when I was about 17, so he and I said that we may want to do something for this, and we assured them. We said we could try our best, of course. And so he made a documentary of the community who are undergoing this issue. And then I used that documentary to write an email, and we sent it through our parliament for consent. And then we decided that we're going to take this up and send it to the officials. And so we sent it from our position, from our designation, saying that we are Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister. And so we would love to, we would really request you to take action from your side. It would be great if you could do it. And so I think when we talked it from our designation, I think they implemented it in 2 months.
Wow.
And so the reason that I said it as an example for inclusion is that he slowed down for me when he and I were working together. Like when his name is Nyanashekhar, and when he and I were working together, he slowed down. He made sure that I composed the email. And I made sure that he finishes the documentary up, because he has he has different kind of phone. Just he only had the phone system. He did not have fancy laptops, and so I waited until he finished off. And so that's inclusion. And I think the same kind of thing is also we're facing in the Children's Parliament, in the provisional, in the provisional World Children's Parliament we're having. Like, for example, some may have flip phones, some may have smartphones, and some may have, access to internet, and some may have access to laptops and fancy computers. And so we are right now working to make sure that our process works for everyone. So recently, for example, we made sure to shift from Zoom to Duo, because we learned that Zoom consumes a lot of data, and that for African children, data is something that they're not easily getting access to. So we are thinking to shift over to Duo. Because WhatsApp allows very limited participants, we thought that Duo could do some support. And so we're trying it out, different methods, to see what works for us. And be like inclusive, and we definitely are slowing down as well. But even when it's, as I said, in this virtual environment, we're slowing down even more to listen to each other. And as you said, this slowing down really helps us to slow down in our life and to be inclusive, because they were inclusive towards me, and I'm able to empower myself. I'm able to get empowered and also support others to empower.
Yeah, that's such a good theme, I think. Slowing down. I think we're so allergic to that in the modern world, and we try to rush things. But I mean, look at the climate crisis, and we're trying to move fast, and yet we take no action. Whereas, ironically, if we could slow down, I think so many more solutions would become available.
Hopefully.
I want to ask you, what are you most grateful for in the 11 years you've been involved with the children's parliaments? What's most special to you?
Most special. Well, being in this entire movement is really special. Meeting new people is very special to me. Like people like you, and encountering with people like Mr. John Buck, and I also had many people occupied my life. Like I had the opportunity to encounter with many NGOs called Nine is Mine, through which I met different people, like a friend of mine who lives in Peru, Mr. Matt Berry, who had been associated very much with venture capitals, and his work very much relied on that. And then he decided that he's going to work for the world, and he left everything, and now he is in his path, traveling to work for the world, to make change in the world. So getting introduced to those people is, I think, something to which I'm grateful for. And special moments as such, I would say meeting with different leaders such as Miss Michelle Bachelet, the former president of Chile, who is also the present High Commissioner for Human Rights Council in the United Nations. And meeting people such as Dr. Ella Gandhi, Gandhiji's, Mahatma Gandhi's granddaughter, and meeting ambassadors of different countries. Like around, I had met and lobbied with around 50 different countries, like ambassadors of 50 different countries. So those are something that I'm grateful for, and I'm also grateful that I could make some impact in the policy change, where in my fourth, I had the opportunity to address the United Nations for 4 times, and in my fourth trip, when I was in Geneva, 3 of my trips were in New York, the headquarters, and the fourth trip was in Geneva. So when we were there for the Universal Periodic Review, we were able to bring some basic changes in the some changes in the, I wouldn't say basic, some changes in the policy level. For example, we recommended the government to allocate the promised percentage for education and health. And so I think we were also able to recommend the government to improve the water and sanitation facilities. And so those things, I think a few things have we really heard that a couple of our recommendations got implemented, heard back from them. So
Wow, that's fantastic. Well, we're coming to the end of our time together, and I just want to really acknowledge you for all of the amazing things that you've achieved and the impact that you're making on the world. And I'm so excited to follow you, and I know you're going to continue to be a real force for good in the world. So it's just been an absolute pleasure to have the chance to talk to you, and thank you for your time and for sharing all of your wisdom with us.
thank you so much for inviting me to this podcast. And as I said, I really enjoyed my first podcast. And dear listeners, and Lisa, thank you for your patience. And also, if If you think I had made some mistakes, kindly let me know your feedback, and I'll try to improve myself. And
Thank you.
Lisa, one more thing that I wanted to add in this.
Please.
I think I forgot to mention about, let's see, as and when we were talking, I was about to mention provisional. No, I did mention about that. Suddenly it came and it popped off. Oh, let me think about it.
That's right. Take your time.
Sorry. Okay. You were asking me that how, like, what advice that I would give to listeners. And one more thing that I would like to add here is maybe our listeners, and I suggest that we may want to also share our own stories. That's what I saw in this parliament. I learned in this parliament as an important thing. Like when I entered into the United Nations, the first thing that I was told and I learned was to share our own stories, because we see issues that impact us, and because we could talk about the issues that impact us very well, it's really worth to talk about something that happened to us. And especially personal experiences seem to be more valuable in the United Nations than when we share the experiences of the others. Of course they are valuable too, but our personal experiences are the testimonies. That's what the UN considers. For example, when I went to the first time um, and addressed the United Nations in the 57th session on the Commission on the Status of Women, I think it was really impressive to hear many participants, and around 90% of the participants whom I heard from different events spoke and shared their personal experience, and that impacted a lot. And that's why, even if I had attended, despite of the fact that I attended the first UN conference at the age of 13, that still sticks to my mind.
That's such a good lesson. I think that's for me also one of the main reasons I started this podcast, because I know it's so powerful to share stories, that's how we can learn, how we can embolden each other. And it's something that I am also trying to practice myself, because I have a tendency to think that I'm not interesting and people don't want to hear about me. But I'm learning that it really creates relationships and openness and new possibilities when we share our stories. So it's a good reminder.
Definitely your story. I mean, how you created podcast is itself a story to me, and I'm so inspired to listen to it, and so happy to that. I mean, because um, that you're having experience with persons like me, the first time speakers, then you could definitely say that, oh, Lisa, what are the skills that a first time speaker should learn? Then you could derive or draw from what I spoke, and definitely say that Swarna did these things, and maybe you want to do, and Swarna did not do these things, so you may also want to consider doing this.
That's a good point. So is there anything else that you want to share with listeners that we haven't covered yet, or like?
I think I'm happy. Thank you
Great.
for the opportunity.